Vespera watched the rain turn her eviction notice into a blur of ink, knowing the job interview in 40 minutes was her last defense against homelessness. Logic screamed at her to get on the bus and ignore the black sedan smoking on the shoulder in the downpour. She believed missing that minimum wage job would be the worst tragedy of her day. She didn't know that the man stumbling on the highway wasn't having car trouble. He was burning alive without fire. By stopping to help him, Vespera thought she was ruining her life. She didn't realize she was trading unpaid rent for the eternal obsession of a vampire king fleeing a death trap. The rain came down in sheets, turning the gutters of Ashford Street into rivers that swallowed the last of Vespera's resolve. She stood under the cracked awning of the pawn shop, watching the envelope in her hand darken with moisture. Inside, a single piece of paper confirmed what her landlord had been threatening for 3 months. Eviction notice, final warning, 7 days to vacate. The city smelled like wet concrete and exhaust fumes, but underneath, something older lingered. Rot, maybe, or just the particular decay that settled into places where hope went to die. Vespera tucked the envelope into her jacket and stepped into the downpour. Her interview was in 40 minutes. Across town. The position at Harwick & Associates wasn't glamorous. Data entry, minimum wage. But it was a foothold, a chance to stop the freefall that had begun when her mother's medical bills consumed everything, then kept consuming even after the funeral. The bus shelter ahead flickered with a dying fluorescent light. She quickened her pace, her sneakers squelching against the pavement, when the screech of tires made her head snap up. A black sedan had swerved onto the shoulder of the highway overpass above, smoke pouring from its hood. The driver's door hung open, and there, stumbling onto the concrete barrier, was a figure wrapped in what looked like a heavy coat, moving with the jerky desperation of someone on fire. Except he wasn't on fire, he was burning anyway. Vespera's breath caught. Even from this distance, she could see the skin of his hands blistering, peeling away in real time, as he tried to shield his face. The morning sun, breaking through the clouds for the first time in days, hit him like a spotlight. Her feet moved before her mind caught up. She ran toward the overpass access stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was insane. She had $20 in her account, and an interview that could save her life. But the man was collapsing against the barrier, his coat smoking, and no one else was stopping. Cars rushed past, indifferent metal bullets in the rain. Vespera reached the top of the stairs, gasping. Up close, the damage was worse. His hands were raw meat, his face turned away, but clearly suffering the same fate. The smell hit her, not burning flesh exactly, but something chemical wrong, like ozone and copper. "Hold on," she choked out, shrugging off her jacket. It was cheap polyester. Probably wouldn't help, but it was something. She threw it over his head and shoulders, trying to block the light. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. The touch seared, not hot, but cold. So profoundly cold it felt like frostbite in reverse, burning through her skin. She gasped, but didn't pull away. His fingers were strong, desperate, and when he looked up at her through the gap in the jacket, his eyes stopped her heart. They were grey, storm cloud grey, ancient and aware, set in a face that would have been beautiful if it weren't currently dissolving in the sunlight. High cheekbones, a mouth pressed thin with pain, and an expression of such shocked recognition that Vespera felt seen in a way she'd never experienced. "The car," he managed, his voice like gravel, wrapped in silk. "Please." She helped him stumble back to the sedan, using her body to shield him, feeling that terrible cold radiating through her clothes. The interior was dark, windows tinted almost black. He collapsed into the driver's seat, and she slammed the door shut. For a moment, she just stood there, shaking. Her wrist throbbed where he touched her, a perfect circle of reddened skin already forming. The jacket lay on the ground, smoking slightly. The window rolled down an inch. "Oh, your name," he said. Not a question, a command, but one edged with something that might have been wonder. "Vespera, Vespera Finch, Vespera." He repeated it like a prayer or a curse. "You should go. You're late for something important." How did he know that? But she was already backing away, her phone buzzing in her pocket. Probably the interview reminder. The sedan's engine turned over, smooth and expensive, and it pulled away with the eerie silence of a hearse. She made it to Harwick and Associates, 17 minutes late. The receptionist didn't even look up. "Position's been filled. Mr. Harwick doesn't see people who can't respect his time." The bus ride home took an hour. Vesper spent it staring at the mark on her wrist, which had settled into a pale ring, like a brand. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained grey, pressing down on the city like a lid on a pot. Her apartment building looked worse in daylight. Peeling paint, cracked steps, the smell of mildew in the hallway. She climbed to the 3rd floor and found Mrs. Chen from 3B standing by her door, arms crossed. "Ha! Someone came by for you," the old woman said, her accent thick. "Fancy man left this." She held out a cream-colored envelope, heavy stock, sealed with actual wax. Dark red wax, pressed with a symbol Vespera didn't recognize. Something like a rose wrapped in thorns. "What did he look like?" Vespera asked, taking the envelope. "Pale, very pale. Pretty though. Said you'd know what it meant." Mrs. Chen shuffled back to her apartment, muttering something in Mandarin that sounded like a prayer. Inside her studio, Vespera sat on the edge of her mattress and broke the seal. The paper inside was thick, the handwriting elegant, almost calligraphic. Asterisk, Miss Finch. Asterisk. "Your kindness this morning has placed you in a position both fortunate and precarious. There are those who saw what you did, and they will have questions. For your protection, I request your presence at Thornfield Estate tonight at 8 o'clock. A car will be sent." Asterisk. "This is not a debt. This is a courtesy, a spale, that I would strongly advise you to accept." Asterisk. Isidore Vane. Asterisk. No addresser, no explanation, just the assumption that she would comply, and the subtle threat wrapped in the word protection. Outside, the sun was setting, and somewhere in the city, a man who burned in daylight was waiting for her answer. A phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Asterisk. "The car is already outside." She moved to the window and looked down. A black sedan, the same one from this morning, idled at the curb. The driver's window was down, and even from 3 floors up, she could see the grey eyes watching her. The driver's eyes held hers for 3 heartbeats before he looked away, his attention returning to the street as if her compliance was already certain. The arrogance of it made something hot flare in Vespera's chest. Not quite anger, not quite fear. Something closer to the feeling she'd had this morning when she'd stepped between Isidore Vane and the sunlight. She let the curtain fall back into place. Her reflection stared back from the darkened window glass. Pale face, dark circles under her eyes, from too many double shifts, hair that needed washing. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman barely keeping her head above water, living in a studio apartment, with water stains on the ceiling, and a radiator that clanged like a prisoner rattling bars. The letter crinkled in her hand. Asterisk. For your protection, Vespera grabbed her coat. The sedan's interior smelled of leather and something else, something faintly sweet that reminded her of the funeral home where her grandmother's wake had been held. The driver didn't speak as she slid into the back seat. He simply pulled away from the curb with the smooth precision of someone who'd made this journey 1,000 times. They drove north, away from the cramped grid of her neighborhood, into areas where the streets widened and the buildings grew taller, then older, then fewer. The city gave way to estates hidden behind stone walls, properties that sprawled across acres rather than squeezed into lots. Trees lined the roads here, their bare branches forming tunnels overhead. Vespera's phone had no signal. She checked 3 times. The driver's eyes found hers in the rearview mirror, grey, like smoke, like Isidore's had been in the alley, before the sun had forced them closed. "How long have you worked for him?" she asked. The driver's mouth curved, not quite a smile, long enough to know when someone's asking the wrong questions. "What are the right questions? The ones you'll get answered tonight." His accent was faint, something European that she couldn't place. "Mr. Vane doesn't extend invitations lightly." This didn't feel like an invitation. It felt like a summons. "Then you're smarter than most." He turned onto a private road, unmarked, except for a small brass plaque set into the stone gatepost. The words were too weathered to read in the dying light, but not smart enough to stay away. The trees pressed closer here, their trunks thick with age. Through gaps in the branches, Vespera caught glimpses of a house. No, an estate. Gothic revival architecture, all pointed arches and steep gables. The kind of place that belonged in a Victorian novel. Lights glowed in narrow windows. Somewhere, a dog barked. The sound quickly cut off. The car stopped at the base of wide stone steps, and the driver got out and opened her door with the formal precision of a butler in a period drama. Up close, she could see the faint tracery of scars along his neck, pale lines against paler skin. "He's waiting in the library," the driver said. "Mrs. Halloway will show you." The front door opened before Vespera reached it. Her woman stood in the entrance, elderly, but straight-backed, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun. She wore black head to toe, the kind of morning dress that had gone out of fashion a century ago. "Miss Finch." The woman's voice was crisp, British, the accent of someone who'd learned English from BBC broadcasts. "I am Mrs. Halloway. Please, come in." The entrance hall was vast. A chandelier hung from a ceiling, 2 stories high, its crystals catching the light from wall sconces that flickered like candles, though Vespera could see no flames. The floor was marble, black and white in a checkerboard pattern that made her think of chess, of games where pawns were sacrificed. "This way." Mrs. Halloway moved through the house with the confidence of long familiarity, her footsteps making no sound on the marble. Vespera's sneakers squeaked. The walls were lined with portraits, faces that stared down with expressions ranging from stern to sorrowful. In one, a woman in Elizabethan dress held a rose. In another, a man in Victorian evening wear stood beside a fireplace, his hand resting on a skull. They all had the same eyes, grey like smoke. The library was at the end of a long corridor. Mrs. Halloway knocked twice, then opened the door without waiting for a response. "Miss Finch, sir." The room beyond was warmth and shadow. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, packed with volumes that looked older than the building itself. A fire burned in a massive stone fireplace, the flames casting dancing light across Persian rugs and leather furniture. The 4th wall was entirely windows, looking out over grounds that disappeared into darkness. Isidore Vane stood by the fire. He changed clothes since this morning. Now he wore black trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and traced with veins that looked too dark against his pale skin. His hair was damp, as if he'd recently showered. He held a glass of something red that caught the firelight. "Miss Finch." He didn't smile. "Thank you for coming. Did I have a choice?" "There's always a choice." He gestured to a chair near the fire. "Though some choices have more pleasant consequences than others. Please, sit." To Mrs. Halloway, "Tea for our guest." "I don't want tea." Vespera stayed standing. "I want to know what's going on." "You said I was in danger." "From what?" Isidore took a sip from his glass. In the firelight, The liquid looked less like wine, and more like, she looked away. From those who saw what you did this morning, he said. From those who will wonder why a human would risk herself for one of us. From those who will assume you know more than you should. One of us. Vespera's voice came out steadier than she felt. You're saying you're not human. I'm saying that the world is larger and stranger than your experience has prepared you for. He set his glass down on the mantel. I'm saying that you stepped into something this morning that you don't understand, and that ignorance could get you killed. Then explain it. That's why you're here. He moved closer, not quite invading her space, but near enough that she could feel the cold radiating from him. Not the chill of winter air, but something deeper, the cold of stone, of graves. My name is Isidore Vane, he said. I am approximately 600 years old. I was born in Provence, died in Paris, and have lived in this city for the past century. I am what your folklore calls a vampire, though that word carries connotations that are both more and less accurate than you might imagine. And I am, for better or worse, the king of this territory. Vespera's laugh came out sharp, almost hysterical. You're insane. Am I? He held up his hand, turning it in the firelight. The skin was flawless, unmarked, except for a thin white scar across his palm. You saw me burn this morning. You saw the smoke rising from my skin. You felt the heat of it. She had. She'd felt it through her coat, through his shirt, the terrible heat of flesh that was cooking from the inside out. There are medical conditions that cause spontaneous combustion in sunlight, that heal within hours, that allow a man to survive without breathing. He was closer now, close enough that she could see the absolute stillness of his chest. No rise and fall, no breath. You're a rational woman, Miss Finch. I can see it in your eyes. You're already assembling the evidence. You're already reaching the conclusion you don't want to reach. This is impossible. Most true things are. He stepped back, giving her space. Mrs. Halloway is human, as is my driver, Gregor. They serve me willingly and are compensated generously for their discretion. There are approximately 200 of my kind in this city, living in the spaces between your world and ours. We have rules, structures, a society that predates your constitution. Vespera's legs felt weak. She sank into the chair he'd offered, her mind racing. Vampires. He was telling her vampires were real, and he was one of them, and she'd saved his life this morning, without knowing what he was. Why are you telling me this? Because you're already involved. Isidore picked up his glass again, swirling the contents. Because the moment you threw your coat over me, you became visible to every vampire in a 3-block radius. They felt my gratitude. They sensed the bond that formed. Bond. The word came out strangled. A life debt. It's old magic. Older than Christianity. Older than Rome. When one of us is saved by a human, a connection forms. Nothing dramatic. You won't be able to read my thoughts or feel my emotions, but you'll carry my mark, and others will know you're under my protection. He gestured to her wrist. She looked down at the pale circle, the one that hadn't faded. That's not possible. You didn't touch me there. I didn't need to. The mark appears where the debt is strongest. In your case, where your pulse beats closest to the surface, or his eyes met hers, where your life is most vulnerable. The fire crackled. Outside, wind rattled the windows. There are those in my court, Isidore continued, who will see this as an opportunity, a human marked by the king, protected, but not claimed. They'll wonder what you know, what you might be convinced to reveal. Some will try to use you against me. Others will simply try to remove you as a potential threat. I'm not a threat to anyone. You're a variable. In our world, that's the same thing. He moved to the window, looking out at the darkness. I'm offering you a choice, Miss Finch. You can accept my protection formally, become part of my household. You'll be safe here, fed, housed, compensated for your time. In exchange, you'll serve as my, let's call it a liaison, a human perspective in a world that sometimes forgets what humanity looks like. Or, you can walk away. I'll have Gregor take you home, and you'll never hear from me again. But the mark will remain, and so will the danger, and I won't be able to help you when they come. Vespera's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her thighs, willing them to be still. When who comes? Others, the ones who want my throne. His reflection in the window was faint, barely there. The ones who see a human marked by the king as proof that I've grown weak, that I've forgotten what we are. And what are you? He turned to face her, and in the firelight, his eyes were the color of ash. Predators, Miss Finch. We're predators pretending to be civilized, and some of us have grown tired of pretending. Minor, Vespera, didn't go home that night. Mrs. Halloway showed her to a room on the second floor, a space larger than her entire apartment. The bed was a four-poster monstrosity with velvet curtains. The bathroom had a clawfoot tub and towels so thick they felt like blankets. Clean clothes appeared on the dresser while she showered, jeans that fit perfectly, a soft sweater in deep green, undergarments that made her wonder exactly how much Isidore Vane knew about her. She didn't sleep. She lay in the enormous bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her. Footsteps in the corridor, voices too low to make out words. Once, something that might have been laughter, or might have been a scream. At dawn, she went to the window. The grounds stretched out below, formal gardens, giving way to woods. In the distance, she could see a wall, high and topped with iron spikes. Not to keep people out, she realized, to keep them in. A knock at the door made her jump. Miss Finch, Mrs. Halloway's voice. Mr. Vane requests your presence for breakfast. Breakfast was served in a conservatory filled with plants that shouldn't have been able to survive this far north. Orchids bloomed in impossible colors. Vines climbed the glass walls, their leaves glossy and dark. The air was humid, thick with the smell of earth and growth. Isidore sat at a small table, reading a newspaper. He looked up as she entered. Good morning. I hope you slept well. I didn't sleep at all. Honest. I appreciate that. He folded the newspaper. Mrs. Halloway has prepared eggs and toast. The coffee is fresh. Vespera sat. The food was real, she discovered. Hot and perfectly seasoned. She ate because her body demanded it, because she hadn't eaten since yesterday's lunch shift. You're not eating, she said. I had breakfast earlier. His tone suggested she shouldn't ask what that breakfast had consisted of. I thought we might spend today getting you acclimated. There are things you need to understand about this world, rules that will keep you alive. I haven't agreed to stay, haven't you? He leaned back in his chair. You're still here. You're eating my food, wearing clothes I provided. You didn't call anyone last night to tell them where you were, because she had no one to call, because her phone still had no signal, and she suspected that wasn't an accident. I need time to think. Time is something we have in abundance. He stood. Come, let me show you the hollows. The estate was vast, a maze of rooms and corridors that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. Isidore led her through a portrait gallery, where the painting's eyes followed their movement, through a ballroom with a floor so polished she could see her reflection, through a music room, where a piano sat silent beneath a dustcloth. The Hollows has been my seat of power for 90 years, he said. Before that, it belonged to the previous king. Before that, to his predecessor. The house remembers. Sometimes it shows those memories to those it finds interesting. Houses don't remember. This one does. Or they descended a staircase into what Isidore called the lower halls. Here, the architecture changed. The walls were stone instead of plaster. The ceilings lower. Torches burned in iron sconces, their flames casting shadows that moved wrong. This is the old part of the house, Isidore said, built on the foundations of something much older. My court gathers here. The corridor opened into a vast chamber. It was part throne room, part cathedral, the ceiling lost in darkness. Overhead, stone columns rose like trees. At the far end, on a raised dais, sat a chair carved from a single piece of black wood, its back shaped like wings. Figures moved in the shadows. Vespera counted 6, then 8, then lost count as more emerged. All they were beautiful, all of them, with a kind of beauty that made her throat tight. Men and women who looked like they'd stepped out of paintings, their skin luminous in the torchlight, their eyes reflecting like cats. They were all watching her. "My court," Isidore said quietly. "The oldest families in the territory. They've served the throne for generations." A woman stepped forward. She was small, delicate, with dark hair that fell to her waist and eyes like amber. She wore a dress that might have been fashionable in the 1920s, all beading and fringe. "So this is the human." Her voice was musical, almost hypnotic. "The one who saved our king, Alara." Isidore's tone held a warning. "Miss Finch is under my protection." "Of course," Alara smiled, showing teeth that were just slightly too sharp. "We're all so grateful for her intervention, aren't we?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber, but Vespera heard the edge beneath them, the doubt, the hunger. A man emerged from the shadows near the throne. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with golden hair and features that belonged on a Greek statue. He moved with the fluid grace of a dancer or a fighter, and when his eyes met Vespera's, she felt the impact like a physical blow. "Valerius." Isidore's voice had gone cold. "I didn't expect you until tonight's council. I heard we had a guest." Valerius circled closer, studying Vespera, like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "A human marked by the king. How unprecedented. It's a life debt, nothing more, is it?" Valerius stopped a few feet away. "Forgive me, my king, but some of us remember the last time you took a human under your protection. How did that end again?" The temperature in the chamber dropped. Vespera's breath misted in the air. "Careful," Isidore said softly. "I'm always careful." Valerius smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "I'm simply wondering if history is about to repeat itself. If we're about to watch you make the same mistake twice. My mistakes are mine to make. Not when they endanger the entire court." Valerius turned to address the others. "Our king burns in daylight and survives only because a human throws herself between him and the sun. He brings that human here, marks her, claims her under his protection, and we're supposed to pretend this is normal, that this isn't a sign of weakness." Alara moved to Isidore's side, her hand resting on his arm. "Valerius, this isn't the time." "When is the time?" "When the Council of Elders arrives and sees what he's done. When they decide our king is unfit to rule." Valerius's voice rose, echoing off the stone walls. "We're already under scrutiny. The Northern Territories are watching for any sign that Isidore Vane has lost his edge. And now he's playing house with a human." "Enough." Isidore's voice cracked like a whip. "You forget yourself. Do I, or am I, the only one brave enough to say what we're all thinking?" The chamber fell silent. Vespera could feel the tension, thick enough to choke on. The other vampires watched with the stillness of predators, waiting to see which way the prey would run. Isidore stepped forward, and suddenly he was different, larger somehow. Though his physical size hadn't changed, the air around him seemed to darken, to thicken with an authority that made Vespera's knees weak. "You question my judgment," he said quietly. "How you question my right to rule? Say it plainly, Valerius. Challenge me, if that's your intent." Valerius held his gaze for a long moment. Then slowly he bowed his head. "No, my king. I would never." "Then remember your place." Isidore turned to the others. "All of you. Miss Finch is under my protection. How you? Anyone who harms her answers to me. Anyone who uses her against me will face consequences that make true death look merciful. Are we clear? Murmurs of assent. Ilara squeezed Isidore's arm, her expression worried. Come, Isidore said to Vespera. We're done here. He led her back up the stairs, through the twisting corridors, into the daylight world above. Neither of them spoke until they reached the library, where the fire still burned and the morning sun streamed through the windows. I apologize, Isidore said. That was unfortunate. He wants your throne. Yes, and he'll use me to get it. He'll try. Isidore poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter. Valerius was my fledgling once. I made him what he is, taught him everything he knows, and now he thinks he's learned enough to replace me.
Has he?
Isidore's smile was sharp. We'll find out. 3 days passed. Vespera learned the rhythms of the hollows, the way the household shifted between day and night. During daylight hours, the upper floors were hers to explore. Mrs. Holloway taught her which rooms were safe and which were better left alone. Gregor showed her the grounds, the gardens, the wall that marked the boundary between Isidore's territory and the world beyond. At night, the house came alive. Vampires arrived for court, for council, for the endless political maneuvering that seemed to occupy their immortal hours. Vespera watched from the shadows, learning names and faces, trying to understand the complex web of alliances and enmities. Ilara was kind to her, in a distant sort of way. She brought Vespera books, taught her the basics of vampire etiquette, warned her which court members to avoid. Valerius is dangerous, she said one evening, but he's not the only one. There are others who resent the king's attachment to you. Be careful. But Isidore himself was often absent, dealing with matters he didn't explain. But sometimes, late at night, he would come to the library where Vespera had taken to reading. They would sit by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about Provence in the 14th century, about Paris during the Revolution, about the century he'd spent in this city, watching it grow and change. She told him about her grandmother, about the diner, about the small, ordinary life she'd been living before she'd stumbled into his world. Do you miss it? He asked one night. Sometimes. She closed her book. But I'm not sure I can go back, even if I wanted to. You can't. His voice was gentle. The mark won't fade. You'll always be visible to us now, always vulnerable. Then I guess I'm stuck here. Is that so terrible? She looked at him, at the way the firelight caught in his grey eyes, at the sharp lines of his face that were starting to feel familiar. I don't know yet. He smiled, and for a moment he looked almost human, almost alive. That was the night she heard the voices. She'd gone to her room, exhausted from another day of learning how to survive in a house full of predators. But sleep wouldn't come, so she got up, thinking she'd go back to the library for another book. The corridor was dark. Most of the household was in the lower halls for some kind of council meeting. Vespera had been specifically told to stay in her room, but she'd never been good at following orders. She was passing a door she'd never seen open when she heard it. Valerius's voice, low and urgent, "Can't wait any longer. The elders arrive in 2 days. If we're going to move, it has to be before then." Vespera froze. She should have kept walking, should have gone back to her room. Instead, she pressed closer to the door, her heart hammering. Another voice, one she didn't recognize. And the human. She's the key. Proof that Isidore has grown sentimental, weak. Once the elders see how attached he's become. Valerius laughed, the sound cold. They'll have no choice but to remove him. And when they do, the throne will need a new occupant. You're certain you can control the vote? I have enough support. Ilara is loyal to Isidore, but the others, they're tired of his restraint, his rules. They want a king who remembers what we are, what we're meant to be. Footsteps, coming toward the door. Vespera ran. She made it 3 steps before the door opened, and light spilled into the corridor. She pressed herself into a doorway, holding her breath, praying the shadows were deep enough. Valerius emerged, and with him, two others she recognized from court. They were talking, their voices fading as they moved toward the stairs. She waited until she couldn't hear them anymore. Then she waited another 5 minutes, counting her heartbeats, before she dared to move. She had to tell Isidore, had to warn him. She was turning toward the stairs when a hand closed over her mouth, and she was pulled backward into darkness. The hand was cold, but she knew its touch before the scent of winter rain and old parchment reached her. Isidore spun her around, his finger pressed to his lips. His eyes were molten silver in the darkness, and he pulled her deeper into the alcove, into a space so narrow their bodies pressed together. "How much did you hear?" His whisper was barely sound, just breath against her ear. "Enough." Her heart was still racing. "Valerius, he's planning." "I know." His jaw tightened. "I've known for weeks." She pulled back enough to see his face. "Then why?" "Because I needed to know how far it went. Who else was involved?" His hand came up, fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "And because I needed you safe while I gathered proof." "The winter ball," she breathed. "That's when he'll move." "Yes." Something dangerous flickered in his expression. "The elders will be there, witnesses to either his triumph or his destruction." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, vulnerable. "Vespera, you should leave. Tonight. I can arrange." "No." The word came out fiercer than she intended. "I'm not running. He'll use you against me." "You heard him. Then we use that." She straightened, her mind already racing. "The library. There's a section on ancient laws, succession rights. I've been reading." "Of course you have." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "The laws of lineage. They're older than the council, older than the throne itself. If we can invoke them." He kissed her then, cutting off her words. It was brief, fierce, tasting of desperation, and something that might have been hope. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. 3 days, he said.
"Can you be ready?"
"I'm already ready." The ballroom glittered like the inside of a jewel box. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors, and everywhere Vespera looked, there was beauty that felt like a blade pressed to her throat. The guests moved in their finery, all pale skin and dark eyes, their laughter like wind chimes in a graveyard. She wore midnight blue silk that Alara had chosen, the fabric clinging to her body like water. Diamonds, real ones, Isidore had assured her, circled her throat. She felt like prey dressed for the feast. "Breathe," Alara murmured beside her.
"You look like a queen."
"Now you must believe it." Vespera's fingers tightened on the leather portfolio she carried. Inside were the pages she'd copied from the ancient texts, the laws written in languages that predated nations, her insurance, her weapon. Isidore stood at the far end of the ballroom, surrounded by the council of elders, 5 of them, ancient and terrible in their formal blacks and deep crimsons. She could feel their power from here, a pressure against her skin like deep water. Valerius was there too, playing the loyal advisor, but she saw the way his eyes tracked the room, counting allies, measuring distances. The dinner was announced. Long tables materialized, laden with food that made Vespera's stomach turn. Roasted meats, glistening with fat. Wine so dark, it looked like liquid night. Fruit piled in impossible towers. She took her seat beside Isidore, acutely aware of every eye on her, the only human in a room of predators. The first course was served. Conversation flowed around her like a river around stone. She picked up her fork, then noticed no one was eating. They moved food around their plates, raised glasses to their lips without drinking, performed the ritual of dining without ever consuming a single bite, except the wine that they drank. Her hand trembled slightly As she set down her fork, Isidore's fingers found hers beneath the table, squeezed once. My lords and ladies, Valerius stood, his glass raised. Cinder, toast to our gracious host, King Isidore, who has led us with such restraint these many years. The word hung in the air like poison, and to his honored guest, Miss Finch, who has brought such warmth to these cold halls, his smile was all teeth. Though one must wonder at the wisdom of keeping such a fragile creature so close, accidents happen, after all, especially in times of transition. The threat was unmistakable. Around the table, some faces remained neutral, others showed the barest hint of agreement. Vespera stood. The scrape of her chair was loud in the sudden silence. "Forgive me," she said, her voice steady despite the fear singing through her veins. "But I believe you're mistaken about several things, Lord Valerius." Isidore's hand tightened on hers in warning, but she pulled free. She opened the portfolio, drew out the first page. It's the laws of lineage, as set down by the First Council in the year 823. Article 7, Section 3. She read in a clear voice, "No challenge to the throne may be issued during a time of declared peace, unless the challenger can prove before witnesses that the seated monarch has broken the sacred covenants." She looked up. Every eye in the room was fixed on her. "The sacred covenants," she continued. "Protection of the bloodline, maintenance of the veil, justice according to ancient law." And she pulled out another page. "The covenant of sanctuary, which states that any being, human or vampire, who is claimed under the king's protection, becomes inviolate. To harm them is to harm the king himself." Valerius's expression had gone cold. "You dare quote our laws to us, human. I dare quote your laws to those who seem to have forgotten them." She turned to the elders. "Lord Valerius accuses King Isidore of weakness for offering me protection. But by your own ancient laws, that protection is his right, his duty. To revoke it would be to break covenant." The eldest of the council, a woman whose face was a map of centuries, leaned forward. "The girl speaks truth. The laws are clear." "But surely," Valerius interjected, "the issue is not the protection itself, but the attachment, the compromised judgment. Show me the law that forbids attachment." Vespera's voice cut through his. "Show me where it says a king cannot feel, cannot choose companionship, cannot." She drew a breath. "Cannot love." The word fell like a stone into still water. Isidore rose beside her. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 6 centuries. "Valerius, you speak of what we are, what we're meant to be, but you've forgotten what we were. It's why the covenants were written in the first place." He moved around the table, each step deliberate. "We were monsters once. We took what we wanted, killed without thought, ruled through terror, and we nearly destroyed ourselves. The First Council created the laws, not to weaken us, but to save us, to give us something beyond endless hunger." He stopped in front of Valerius. "You want a king who remembers what we are? I remember. I remember the blood wars, the purges, the centuries of darkness, and I remember the choice we made to be more than our hunger." Valerius's hand moved to his side. Vespera saw the flash of silver, a blade, ancient and wicked. "Then perhaps," Valerius said softly, "it's time for a new choice." He moved faster than thought, but Isidore was faster, catching his wrist, twisting. The blade clattered to the floor. "You dare draw steel in the presence of the council." The elder's voice was thunder. Around the room, Valerius's allies shifted, uncertain. The coup was crumbling before it began. "I invoke the right of judgment," Isidore said, "for attempted assassination of the king and violation of sanctuary." Valerius's face went white. The right of judgment was absolute, final. "The council recognizes the invocation," the elder said. Valerius of the House of Thorn, you are stripped of rank and title. You will be escorted to the lower chambers to await sentencing. Two guards materialized from the shadows. Valerius didn't struggle as they led him away, but his eyes found Vespera's. The hatred there was pure and cold. The ballroom remained silent for a long moment after he was gone. Then, slowly, the other conspirators knelt one by one, heads bowed in submission. The elder rose. It seems the evening's entertainment has concluded. King Isidore, your judgment stands. His does your throne. She looked at Vespera, something like approval in her ancient eyes. And your choice of companion shows more wisdom than some gave you credit for. The aftermath was quieter than Vespera expected. Home the guests departed in a rustle of silk and whispered conversations. Holmes. The ballroom emptied until only she and Isidore remained, standing among the ruins of the untouched feast. You could have been killed, he said finally. So could you. I'm already dead. You know what I mean. She turned to face him. Was it true, what you said about love? He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I have lived 600 years. Vespera, I have known desire, obsession, hunger, but love. He reached out, his fingers trembling slightly as they touched her face. That is something I thought lost to me, until you. She leaned into his touch. I should be terrified of you. You should be, but I'm not. She smiled. I'm terrified of losing you. He kissed her then, and it was different from before. Not desperate or fierce, but tender, reverent, like a promise, written in breath and touch. When they finally parted, the first light of dawn was touching the windows. Isidore flinched slightly, though the glass was treated. Safe. Come, he said, taking her hand. Let me show you the sunrise from the tower, where the light can't reach. But we can watch the world wake up together. They climbed the spiral stairs, her hand in his, and Vespera thought about the strange path that had brought her here, to this impossible love, this dangerous, beautiful life. At the top of the tower, they stood at the window, watching color bleed across the sky, his arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Oh, what happens now? She asked. Now. His voice was soft. Now we write our own story, together. And as the sun rose over the ancient estate, painting everything in shades of gold and rose, Vespera felt the last of her fear fall away. She was home. She was his, and he was hers. In the growing light, she could almost forget he cast no reflection in the glass. Almost.